evening to you as we get started here. Just making sure everything's good to go, and we'll get rolling here. Bonus coverage you only get on the YouTube channel. All right, let's see. We're live. Had to clean the camera. All right. Let's do this here. It is the 200 level. Mike Carpenter in the basement studio on a Wednesday evening. And Illinois won a game. And they did so in somewhat impressive fashion against, yeah, sure, not a very good Iowa team, but a win is a win. And at this point in the season, as we end the month of February, that's it for February. The next game is March 2nd. They needed that in the worst way. I think the fans needed that in a bad way too. And we're going to talk a little bit about how last night going into it, you know, what the vibes were going in and then what the vibes were coming out. Now, did they change exponentially? I'm not sure. But I don't want to bury the lead here. I think it is important to start by saying this Illinois program will make the NCAA tournament for what would be 6 consecutive years if you count the COVID year back in 2020. That team probably would have been a 6 seed, 7 seed at worst. I mean, the way they were playing late in the season, they worked their way up into a decent seed conversation. This one has a couple games left where they could work their way back into a 7 or a 6, but they're probably firmly in the 8-9 line right now. And I think we got to start with that. This is nothing to sneeze at. When you consider what this program was under John Gross, it needs to be said that Brad Underwood has raised the floor exponentially from what he had when he took over this job. You know, I have been critical about Brad Underwood this season more than most because there's been a lot of ups and downs that I didn't feel necessarily had to be ups and downs to the extent that they were. But the fact remains, when your floor is making the NCAA tournament, you are in a pretty good place as a program. So let's not bury the lead. That is a major accomplishment, and it's something that should be celebrated. And even if it is a one-and-done appearance in the NCAA tournament, you're in the tournament. I mean, don't ever take that for granted, and I'm certainly not. What I thought was impressive, too, with last night's win against Iowa was considering the temperature coming into that game, you figured, and I think rightly so, that the first few minutes of that game would be telling as to what Illini team was going to show up. And if they would have come out flat in that game, I think that it would have been both understood and also extremely frustrating because it seemed like mentally this team was in a very precarious position and that they were fragile. I mean, we saw in the previous 3 games that when things started going bad against Michigan State and then Wisconsin and then Duke, the games got away from them. And that did not happen yesterday. It could have when Iowa went on a 9-0 run, when you did the substitutions and then immediately put the starters back in and you put a kibosh on that. So overall, there were many more positives than negatives last night. And the biggest one of all is you punched your ticket essentially to the tournament. It is a historically weak bubble. I know Brad Evans has talked about that. I know that other bracketologists have mentioned that as well. Illinois' resume is good enough to be in the tournament without another win. And if that means they lose out and they fall all the way down to a 10 seed, then so be it. But they're in. And if that is your starting point, that is a place with which Brad Underwood can work off of this offseason. It's kind of interesting as we go into March that I find these two storylines to be pretty intertwined. The rest of this season and the immediate offseason that follows and how much those intersect. We saw last night that Tomislav Ivičić is extremely important to this team. And I know that that had an impact when he was out with mono. It certainly did. Should it have had as much of an impact as it did? That's what I argue. But of course it had an impact because he's a very good player. And while maybe not the most talented or the best, perhaps the most impactful for what you want to do. When Tommy is on, this team could beat almost anybody, or so it feels like. He was on last night. Granted, not a lot of front court presence for Iowa, but you know what? Tommy looked like a star. He did, and he looked healthy, and he looked back to the Tomislav Ivicic we probably saw in, I'd say, December into early mid-January, up through that illness. So that's good news for Illinois. I think that also, when you look at the way that rotation was set, starting Will Riley, it worked out well. Playing Ben Hemrickhouse, 15 minutes last night? Much better than 30. All these things you could point at, and I would in some circumstances, and say, well, what took you so long? Well, the fact is this, and we're going to talk about Brad Underwood a lot today, and really probably for the rest of the season, so get ready for it, everybody. I have applauded many times Brad Underwood's ability to be adaptable. Now, sometimes it's slower than maybe we would want. Sometimes for me, certainly, I get frustrated and thinking, dude, what are you waiting for? But I don't think he's as stubborn as a coach could be. In game situations, certainly it feels that way sometimes, and you're like, Brad, come on, man. But when it comes to the macro changes that he can install in his program, mid-season changes in an offensive philosophy or a defensive tweak that was impactful, at least in one game, kudos to him for being willing to do that. He talked about that last night and said that he would have liked to have made those changes defensively earlier, but illness, injury, things like that precluded him from doing so. Again, debatable, but nonetheless, he did it. Is it enough to change the fortunes of this team as they go through the rest of the season, as they enter the month of March? We'll see. This is certainly not what we expected as far as an 18-13 record, or 18-11. Is that it? Yeah, 18-11 right now. We probably expected better when they were sitting at 12-3. That means they're 6-8 cents with some really bad losses. But there's still those glimpses that are tantalizing that make you think, man, if they just played balls to the wall for 40 minutes, who's saying they couldn't get a win or maybe two in the tournament? I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole yet, though. And there's a few reasons why. As impressive as it was for them to mentally bounce back last night, and as meaningful as it was to punch that ticket to the NCAA tournament for this program, I mean, that still means something. I think that there were still some of the weaknesses that we've seen on display. The shooting, for example, still left something to be desired from long range. The rebounding, not particularly great. I did see a tweet somewhere along the line today, and I wish I could attribute who tweeted this. We had more missed shots than Iowa because we had more possessions. So you could argue that rebounding efficiency or something is probably about equal, but they did, in fact, not rebound like they should have against an Iowa team that was depleted. And that's the lack of Merez. There's certain things, too, within that game where we had some prolonged stretches even on offense where we looked a little bit disjointed. But I think really the tail of the game was the first 4 minutes of each half. It was the first 4 minutes of the first half saying that this team had, in fact, not given up, right? So that's positive sign number one. Positive sign number two, you were up 7.5. Not a one-possession lead, but certainly not a blowout. That game still could have teetered in either direction at that point, and you came out and you blitzed them to start the second half, and you held that lead. You did not even give them a ray of hope in that second half. So I think the first 4 minutes of each half were the most impactful, and I hope the most telling as they go into March. If this team down the stretch fails to win many more games, but they at least put the effort out there and look like they're flying around and trying, and it's just a matter of, they aren't making shots or something, and that's why they lose. I mean, I can live with that. I think what made the last 6 weeks, to be quite honest, so frustrating is that there were prolonged stretches of basketball where they felt like lethargic. And I know there's a myriad of reasons why, and Brad Underwood finally yesterday said he's going to pivot off of it's not going to talk about illness or injury anymore, which I'm very thankful for. But as they enter the month of March, the question I asked people on Twitter today, and that's what we're going to get to with the listener mailbag, is do you feel any better? I mean, in other words, did the win last night against Iowa really change your expectations going forward? And if so, how much? And I was a little bit, I don't want to say surprised, but underwhelmed, I suppose, by the lack of excitement with fans. Not that I expected last night to be a turning point, but it is amazing what one win can do in terms of getting at least some of the stink washed off. The stink remains, but it's bearable now. And you feel as if with these two games coming up against a Michigan and a Purdue team that Michigan with a gaudy record has not been playing their best ball lately, and Purdue has just plain not looked good for about 2-3 weeks. Do you have an opportunity to win one or maybe even two games? I would say winning 0 of them would be an indicator that the Iowa game was just, well, Iowa sucked. I would say if you beat Purdue at least, you are still a better place than you were a month ago. If you win both, then there's genuine excitement again. And that would be kind of nice to see because judging by pictures of the State Farm Center last night in the 200 level, not the podcast, but the actual section, there were a lot of either no-shows or empty seats. From what I understand, there were 500 tickets available. There were some empty pockets at that game last night against a rival, bad as Iowa is, it's still Iowa, that made you think to yourself, how bummed is the fan base right now? And, I mean, I've talked about it, and some have taken issue with how critical I've been, but, I mean, there's a lot of fans that were maybe even more down on the whole thing than I was. I mean, I'm not really a radical, extreme individual, believe it or not. So does this change the tenor, even slightly, going into March? Does this change how we feel about Brad Underwood? It's always dangerous, and trust me, I've been guilty of this, to react overly much, or overreact, to one game. But I do think we saw, yet again in tantalizing fashion, that there are some dudes on this team. What that means going into March, I don't know. I don't expect a deep run. I don't know if I expect a win in the NCAA tournament because other than UCLA in the last month, and I guess Ohio State that's lingering on with, maybe last 4 in as far as bracketology is concerned, you haven't really beat anyone of note. That's why these next 2 games I think are really intriguing because can you carry over what you did against Iowa and lead to another win or two that would actually feel validating as this team enters tournament season? So let's talk about that. We got a listener mailbag and a few other things today on this podcast. And last thing, we beat Iowa. Never, ever get tired of beating Iowa. I think that is one of the cooler things about the Underwood era is that he has had a stranglehold over Iowa. Well, let's put it this way. At home, he certainly has, and they've won a couple games at Iowa as well, so he's got a pretty good record against that rival. He's got a 9-game win streak against Michigan that he can continue. I mean, it could happen on Sunday. I think it's a matchup that Illinois, based on the backcourts, might have an advantage back there, and if you just slow down Golden or Wolf a little bit, this is where you wish Merez was playing, and then Purdue, I mean... Purdue's the bad example there. Wisconsin, up until you lost to them by 20. What was that? 8-9-game win streak? I mean, there are some streaks that Brad Underwood has had going against Big Ten rivals that, yeah, you should hang your hat on and feel really good about. And Iowa, probably at the very top of that, a team that you love to hate. And Fran McCaffrey, it almost got to a point last night when you saw just how undermanned and not very good they are that maybe you felt slightly bad for him, and then you realized, no, it's Iowa. It's fun. They stink, and let's really lay it on them, and they did. So 20-point wins in the Big Ten, regardless of opponent. You take them, and even more so when it's a rival. The 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. Steak, seafood, and spirits. It's a great place for a pregame meal, postgame meal, a date night. I don't know, just going out for drinks with your friends. I mean, the bartenders at Hamilton Walkers, they got 4 of them. They just spotlighted them on their Facebook page. Excellent at what they do, and I will always stand by the fact that they have the best old-fashioned in town. I tried another one at a different place this weekend. It was good. It's not as good as Hamilton Walkers, so I would recommend it to anybody. Their Scratch Kitchen puts out the best food that you could possibly imagine for a city that is flush with good restaurants. Hamilton Walkers, I think, is at the very top. That is Hamilton Walkers Steak, Seafood, and Spirits in downtown Champaign. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728. Got to thank them for what they've done with our house. Our HVAC system has been top-notch. Our furnace has kept us super cozy all winter long. Now that we're getting in the great thaw, thank goodness for that. We're probably going to have our AC tune-up in early April. We just got to call and confirm a date with them. I'd recommend you get their service package, too. It's an annual thing where they come out and check your AC in the spring, your furnace in the fall, and it's worked out great for us. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend, at 217-841-4728. OM Builders LLC, online at ombuildersllc.com. Got to thank Luke and the fellas over there for the great work that they do. You can check out a gallery of their work online and get a free quote while you're at it at ombuildersllc.com. And finally, State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. Life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy. And he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Champagne Showers Podcast Network. Appreciate them and appreciate you. And hello, YouTube. I got a few people popping in. Didn't really announce when I was going to do a podcast because I wasn't sure what time I would get one in today, but here we are. Can you believe it? We've actually sold a few books in the last couple of days. I was worried during this slump, like, oh, God, who's going to want to think about Illini basketball? Well, somehow there are a few. So it's kind of cool to check the numbers as they pop in on Amazon. And if you are local, you can go to Game Day Spirit, either location, or Jane Addams Bookstore in downtown Champaign. They're carrying this book, so appreciate them. I got to throw a random shout out. I'm teaching a class at the university this semester, and we'll continue it next semester as well in the fall. And it's with the College of Media, which is the school I graduated from back in 2009. And it's an intro to sports journalism class. And we had Will Leach on last week as a guest speaker. He did it via Zoom, but Will, of course, is a U of I alum. He writes for The New Yorker. He contributing editor to New York Magazine, has written for The Washington Post, New York Times. He was the co-founder of Deadspin, part of Gawker Media. I mean, the guy is very accomplished. He's got his 7th book coming out. Very gracious with his time and did it via Zoom because he lives down in Georgia. And got him a copy of this book. I sent it to him, and I believe it just arrived yesterday. So hoping he enjoys the trip down memory lane. I want to start by saying, too, within the last couple weeks, when things have not been going well, and it's been more than 2 weeks, it's been a really tough month and a half. Really, that's what it's been. And it so often gets misconstrued that when I am critical or frustrated with things, that somehow there's a part of me that's rooting against Illinois or somehow gleeful when things aren't going well. It could not be more opposite. I mean, I'm stating the obvious here. The Fanboy Carp moniker on Twitter was somewhat tongue-in-cheek. It was suggested by Jeremy Warner back when we were still at 93.5, and I got on Twitter, I think, in 2014. And he just threw that name out there, Fanboy. You're a fanboy, Fanboy Carp. So there we go. But it's true. I mean, whether it's a tongue-in-cheek moniker for 20% of it, the other 80% is pretty accurate. I'm watching that game last night, and at first I don't have a lot of juice in it because of how rough things have been. I want them to win. I want to punch that ticket to the NCAA tournament. And then, Iowa makes that comeback, and you're thinking, oh, God, don't let this be DEFCON 1. Don't let this be a 5-alarm fire. And then they responded the way they did, and as bad as Iowa is, I woke up today, it's like Illinois won. I like that. So let's just get that out of the way. I mean, I know the people that listen to this regularly know that. I think it's just so often misunderstood that those that get frustrated or critical, somehow that is like a ding against their fandom. I would never judge anyone's fandom. You fan however the heck you want to fan. That's on you. I think that different perspectives are valuable, and I think that different takes, same thing. I am not infallible when I come on this podcast or when I tweet. In fact, I put my foot in my mouth, or what would be the Twitter equivalent of that, many times, and I try to own up to that when I do. What I've tried to do along this 4, 5, 6 week stretch when it's gotten frustrating is be as nuanced and level-headed as I could with my tweets. And this is why that medium is particularly tough, because if I can come on a podcast and really explain where I'm at, then I'm running less of a risk of being misunderstood for what I'm really trying to get across. I also feel like I'm pretty good with words, I think. So I'm trying to be very deliberate in the ones I choose. And what I've tried very deliberately in the last 5-6 weeks with all the frustrations is to not ever overtly call for a coach's head. I've not done that. And to express my frustration in the terms of not this sucks and I want to burn everything down, but more I'm concerned, which to me, the word concern has some weight to it, but it's not a death knell. So it just felt good last night. I mean, we can just take a game in a nutshell and say that felt good. And it may or may not mean anything for the rest of the season. That remains to be seen. But it felt good. This leads me to one last thing I'm going to say about a Twitter kerfluffle, if you will, last week. And this is with the guys at the Boardroom, which is a podcast with Illini Board. Long story short, I don't want to rehash it too much, but I had tweeted out Tuesday after the Wisconsin 21-point loss that I was concerned, not just with this team, but with the program going forward. And if you want more context to that, it's basically, come on, the roster is going to turn over. We have questions about Brad Underwood as an in-game coach. That's been there for a while. And you're going to have to get a third assistant, and you're going to see if there's changes made on the staff with, Hamer or Tyler, whatever it may be. Come on. I mean, that to me would warrant concern. And they took issue with that, and I addressed it on Sunday because I felt like they took something that was a fairly nuanced tweet and they misrepresented it to their audience as this guy is calling for a coach's head or putting him on the hot seat. I know today, I got to give them props. I mean, they can roll with the joke. They apparently had changed their Twitter bio to a comment I said on the last podcast. And they listen, apparently. I mean, because I said this probably 20 minutes into the last podcast. I didn't know their names, so I said Huey, Dewey, Louie, and some fourth guy in the microphone. And they've updated their bio on Twitter, and they say, hosted by Huey, Dewey, Louie, and some fourth guy. So, hey, they can roll the joke. I appreciate that. And but even, last night, I'm getting on Twitter less because why? What's the point? But this morning as I got on there to just kind of check and see what people were saying about the game last night, I saw that there were a few things in my interactions because I had called the last podcast after the 43-point loss to Duke rock bottom. And I was getting shit for that. Worst loss in program history. I guess just to put a kibosh on this, and I guess the guys addressed it from their perspective in their podcast last night. Guys, it's all in the game. It's Illini basketball. It's podcasting. Emotions get raised. The only thing I would say, and I'd say it on their podcast, if they wanted to have me, I'd be happy to do that, sure. But I'd say this anywhere. I'll call out when I mess something up. I'm not going to call myself out for being concerned about the way the last month and a half have gone. I don't think that warrants much in the way of reflection. Like, gee, was I being overly dramatic about what I was seeing? I mean, we all saw the same thing, and it was alarming, and it was worth talking about. And for anyone that is putting words in my mouth and saying that was, basically talk of getting rid of a coach, that is, I don't want to use the word irresponsible because it almost sounds like I'm offended by it or something. It's just not accurate. That's it. So I enjoyed last night. I don't want Brad Underwood to get fired. I don't want them to fail. I want them to figure this out. And all the while, I appreciate the fact that the floor has been raised to where you are making tournaments without really blinking an eye. I mean, that's a good place to be. And there's not even a lot of other Big Ten programs that can say that. Hey, guys, we can hold two truths at the same time. This is pretty good. We also want it to be better. And I was thinking about this today about how Brad Underwood, the success that he's had has raised this interesting kind of dichotomy where on one hand, you've had a lot more success with him. But on the other hand, when a program or a team, franchise, whatever, has more success, the fans demand more. I think the key way that we can differentiate fans being either reasonable or unreasonable as they critique what they see is this. If a fan is to look at all that's going on with this basketball team and try to project going forward what might happen this offseason, what needs to happen to kind of fix or improve upon things that didn't work this year, if they were to be critical, but also, how would I say this? Like enjoying and rooting for success all the while. I mean, I think those are two parallel tracks here, to borrow a term from Paul Kowalczyk. Do you remember him, interim AD back in 2015? And what I mean by that is, as fans, it is okay to both enjoy the success you're having and want them to find even more success. You know, an example I would give to you with that is, back in 1995, the Yankees made the ALDS and they lost to Seattle. The manager was Buck Showalter, and he's obviously a good manager, right? I don't know about a Hall of Famer, but he's a good baseball manager. And the franchise decided that, he got to a certain point, we're going to go another direction, and they got Joe Torre. They had a bunch of success. So in 1995, conversations within Yankee fandom would have been something along the lines of, hey, this is really good. We're back in the playoffs for the first time in 12, 13 years. It had been a really bad decade in the 80s and then early 90s for them. They were happy for that, but then there were just enough, and then the front office apparently that said, we need more. Now, Illinois is not in that position because I think continuity with the head coach matters, and I think that he, as Brad Underwood, has shown enough that he can be malleable and flexible and make changes when they are so called for. So I think it's entirely reasonable to say, hey, this is awesome. We made the tournament. We got a chance for a couple quality wins here in the last week of the season. We can improve our seed. I mean, that's a lot better than what John Gross is doing. But at the same time, say, okay, what could Brad Underwood do better? What could he do to improve this program even more, to match the resources that we have? The fact that, by all accounts, this is a top 15, if not top 10 NIL program. I mean, the resources are there to be consistently really, really good. And he has been, for the most part, the definition of very good. I think the other way I look at this, too, is when we get critical and when we're watching these games and we get frustrated about this, that, or the other, ask yourself, what would Brad Underwood expect from his own teams? I mean, ask yourself what Brad Underwood's mindset was going into this last offseason. He loses to UConn, an embarrassing 30-0 run. It was a great season with an Elite Eight run, one that fans will remember forever. So it was really, really good. But you know that Brad Underwood went to last offseason saying, that can't happen again. I want to win a national title. And he even was very deliberately bringing up that notion much of the offseason, preseason practices, national championship. That's the goal. That's what we should be talking about. I love that. I love that ambition. I love just a coach coming out and saying, this is what I want to do. If he is to come out and publicly say that, and yet this happens, why can't we as fans say, well, dude, that's not anywhere close to the expectations you were talking about? I'd argue we can. It's just a really interesting thing that happens. And, it's funny. I can trace this back to 93.5 and the almost decade that I was there with Jeremy and with Lon and all the other guys that we did the show with. And that was a lean decade. I mean, that was bad. The worst decade in my lifetime of Illinois Revenue Sports, and I hope it never gets repeated. I don't want to go back there. And that is part of the reason why I would not want Brad Underwood to be fired or even to leave. Because, yeah, there is the chance that you go back to that. There's the chance you go get some phenom coach. There's the chance you don't. But it's amazing how when things are not just chipper and when things aren't great, and that temperature in the fan base raises just enough. You see the discourse on Twitter go up a notch, like people getting pissed off at each other, just really snappy, catty kind of stuff. And I remember just the chat line lining up. I mean, this is the middle of the Beckman and Lovey era, and I would just call it what it is. This is a 2-10 team. This is abysmal. And somehow that would still elicit responses from people that think, man, enough. I mean, it could be worse. Or I don't even know what some of the things they were saying. This is like, I don't know if that was a specific tweet, but I guess the point is when it comes to sports discourse, I always get a little bit confused, and I shouldn't because I see it all the time. I always get a little bit confused when somewhat not controversial things somehow get looped into being controversial. And I'm like, okay, am I not good with the English language? Am I really not getting this through in translation here? That's why, this episode, I know it's been a lot more kind of macro, if anything, but I think that really speaks to kind of where this program is at, and that as fans we're reckoning with a new kind of reality. And it's a good one. The reality of, oh, you are a good basketball program. I mean, we can say that certifiably, and that's awesome. I hope that stays that way forever. I think that I'm more encouraged at that possibility because the NIL era allows for rabid fan bases, which Illinois certainly is, to have an impact on the on-court product through donations specifically. So I think that that can have some staying power. It's just that we seem to be reckoning as a fan base with this new reality where, okay, we've had success, and this is fun. Therefore, how much or how little should we be critical when things don't quite go the way we want them to? Now, your mileage may vary based on where you end on that spectrum. I just think it's interesting to kind of watch as the discourse over the last 5-6 years, as Illinois' had success, has changed. And there are some moments where everybody's happy. I mean, after the Iowa State game, it was just, bliss. I mean, that was a 48-hour period where there was not a negative thing you could have said, because how could you? I mean, it was perfection. Even after the UConn game, I think that a lot of people appropriately contextualized that season. And as frustrating as the 30-0 run might have been, they thought, hey, all that said, I would relive that year again in a heartbeat, because that was a lot of fun. Like that was an all-time season for a lot of Illini fans, myself included. And celebrating that, I think it's okay. I mean, shoot, what were Bulls fans doing? I mean, I got to think that even in the midst of the Jordan era, when they win 6 out of 8, and then the 2 years they don't, they got close once with Pippen, that there were moments where Bulls fans, if they would have had Twitter and all these things, they would have been livid about this, that, or the other. It wasn't all peaches and cream. And I don't think that would have spoken to some idea that, Bulls fans are the absolute worst. I mean, shoot, look at Alabama football. You see how ticked off they were this year, and this is after a decade of complete dominance. And they go 9-3, God forbid. They go 9-3, and you think that Kalen DeBoer was Lucifer himself. But does that make Alabama fans crazy? I guess the point is, we are, in a way, fat and happy because of success. And it's just really interesting to see the different ways that us Illini fans go forward in this reality of, okay, we got a top 4 Big Ten program. It seems like we're fairly established in that regard. Okay, so how much can I bitch about things? Essentially, right? So I guess my promise to everybody is the rest of the season goes long is to, when levying criticism, doing so based on more than just nitpicking a game or a half. Like, this season's been a slow drip where you have seen troubling signs emerge and get worse. You've seen the valleys get lower. I mean, there was a tweet after the Maryland game where I said, we might have to start questioning how good this team is. Because even going into that Maryland game, I was feeling pretty confident that this team still had the ability to be great. I think that was coming off the heels of the Indiana game. Something like that. Or no, it was after the Michigan State loss, but you thought, hey, it was close. So I think we're still pretty darn good, right? And I don't think that many Illini fans have this season been overly reactive based on one game. I think it has been a confluence of factors. And I will say one thing that has really complicated this and why it was so nice to hear Brad Underwood say this last night about dropping the injury and illness thing that he's talked a lot about. I really do think the messaging from the head guy has only added frustration to what has been frustrations with on the court. It just compounded the issue, I feel like, with the narratives that he was, rightly or wrongly, continually putting out there. And eventually, as fans, you sort of say, well, God, man, okay, we get it. But it nonetheless, I think, took a toll in addition to the more obvious toll-taking that was going on with, a 12-point loss at home to USC or a 20-point loss at home to Maryland, and the list has grown. The question is, what would make this, now that our expectations have been a little bit more modest or made a little bit more modest with the last month and a half, what would make this a successful season? And to me, I think that answer is winning a game in the tournament. I'm not going to say second weekend because I don't know how reasonable that is. Winning a game in the tournament. Winning a game in the Big Ten tournament. Winning one of the next two. I mean, that would get you right there to 21 wins total. And that's never a bad season, especially when you consider a pretty tough schedule that Illinois played. So that would be, hey, okay, you wash your hands of some of the negative stuff. You accomplish some things, and we move on to next year, hopefully learning a thing or two along the way. And I'd be fine with that. I've tempered my expectations. I think a lot of Illini fans have as well. And I guess it's really going to be interesting to see now that temporarily we had that palate cleanser against Iowa. What happens Sunday? I mean, what if we won? It's possible. I actually think the matchup, if you just keep one of their big men from going off, you have a chance. And what if you do that, and then all of a sudden now there's some real energy going into the Purdue game, a team that you haven't beaten in a while, and you finally want to get over that hump against them. I know they're struggling, but that's going to be tough. Braden Smith, Kaufman Wren's killing it right now. Fletcher Lawyer, whatever. But, it's still Purdue, and they always bring it. If anything, I'm glad not just that Illinois punched their ticket last night. That's the big story. But that by doing so, it potentially adds intrigue to the end of the season when I was beginning to worry that there'd be no intrigue at all, other than how bad is this going to get. I mean, that really is nothing to overlook as far as yesterday's win is concerned. It does add some or inject some relevancy back into it. And thank goodness for that, because I think this was trending a direction where if we would have woke up this morning after a loss to Iowa, I don't even know what that conversation would be have. What constructive conversation could you have about that anyway? Probably nothing, to be honest. I got a few things in the YouTube feed here before I get to the listener mailbag. This is Stephen Colbert from Chicago. Nice to see you, Stephen. Smitty, why did these defensive changes take so long to put in place, and why did it take players going to the staff to tell them? A couple things about that, Smitty. So Kylan Boswell talked in the post-game press conference about how the players went to the coaches. Now, I don't mind that. I don't. I understand how initially you'd say, oh, really? It took the players doing that? I actually think that you can have, especially in this era of college basketball, fruitful relationships between the coaches and the players. I think a good coaching staff should be receptive sometimes to player ideas, especially, if it's Kylan Boswell, who is in his third year playing Power 4 basketball. It's okay to say, hey, Kylan, what's going on? What are you thinking? I doubt Kylan was like, Coach, this is bull crap. We need to do this. I am guessing it was a constructive conversation. It worked out well. And Smitty, there was an article by Joey Wagner in Illini Inquirer about why it did take so long, according to Brad Underwood. Injuries and illness played a role, according to Brad. He felt that they couldn't implement it with not having a full deck of cards. I don't necessarily buy that because, just yesterday he talked about how it wasn't ideal to play Iowa after such a short turnaround time. And yet somehow they were able to implement this with some success. They could have done it before. And, Smitty, I think that it could have won you another game. I don't think Michigan State gets rolling like they did against you at the State Farm Center if you were playing the defense you did last night. I know Michigan State is a hell of a lot better than Iowa, but what really keyed them on in the second half was Trey Holloman getting to the lane at will. And we were not hedging screens like we were last night. Yeah, that might have led to a couple plays or a couple slips there from Kohler or another big to just slip to the rim. Could have. But, man, what really got Michigan State rolling in that second half was just the guard action to the middle of the lane, shooting the mid-range, making it often because Kylan was trailing or Kasparis was trailing. It would have made a difference in that game. It would have made a difference in a few others. How many more wins would have equated to? Hard to say. But, yes, I wish it would have been implemented sooner. From Jacob, if we beat Michigan, I think the fan base comes back. I do not disagree, Jacob. I think that because it's Michigan, because they have a gaudy record, and because it would help you with seeding and all that, it would say, okay, you had a really bad 6 weeks. Okay, let's see what you can do. It's March. I mean, it's March 2nd when you play Michigan. On the road, it's not the toughest environment. Never has been up there. That's why I do say go win the game. Go win it. What the hell? I don't think talent is that much of a difference between these two teams. It's an interesting matchup, but I don't think talent-wise there's a huge discrepancy. All right, this is from Eric. Sorry to say this, Carp, but this is just my opinion. I don't believe that coach is the one to get us to a national championship. Eric, I understand that argument, and I don't believe that at the moment either. However, I don't know. I would imagine worse coaches have won it. And here's the other question. And now I'm going to sound like one of those fans that say, it could always be worse. And I don't like to take that approach. I try to think, okay, well, how could it be better? Because maybe there is a better coaching option. But at the moment, let's be real about this. How many coaches out there right now would you say are certifiable national championship level coaches? I mean, God, Hubert Davis got his team to a national title game. They didn't win, but he got them to one, and we're seeing how bad he is right now. A lot of factors go into a team winning the national title. Am I skeptical that Brad Underwood, as he currently has his staff assembled, could win a national title? Yes, of course, I am. That's why it's such a big offseason. You know, what will he learn? How will he delegate? How can he figure out a mix of staff that can make up for whatever deficiencies he has? To me, that's the most intriguing part of the offseason because he'll go get players. I'm really more worried about will he get a coaching staff that can maximize whatever that collection is. One sec, Pat. I'm going to get some water here. Pat says, Eric, I agree. I think he's a stepping stone, much the way Rick Renteria was a stepping stone for the Cubs to lead them to Joe Madden, who finally got them over the hump to a World Series. I just don't care for how much of a trend seeker Brad has become. You know, Pat, that could be true. There could be a guy out there that leads you to greater success than Brad Underwood. I think Brad Underwood's legacy at Illinois, unless it got really bad, is secure as a very positive era. There's also the possibility that that legacy is he got you to point A, and this dude got you to point B. I don't know who that dude would be. I would imagine, even if he would never admit it, that Josh Whitman always has a list in case something happened or Brad took the Texas job or Kansas State opened up and he wanted to go back there. I would imagine he's got a list. I think you kind of have to if you're an AD. But, you know, maybe he's a stepping stone guy. I still think that there's more good than bad with him. Well, that's to say the least. And I'm not really ready to go there yet. I mean, God, it's amazing. I get labeled as, like, I don't want him fired. Can we get the quote out there? Can we just clip that? I don't want Brad Underwood fired. I think he's a very good coach. I've also been frustrated with him this year. If you want to clip that and put it out on Twitter, just to get some of these people, like, get it through their, thick heads, what I'm trying to say. Eric says, I hope, oh, he's talking to Pat there, sorry. This is from Stephen Colbert. In the NIL era, being responsive to player suggestions probably isn't a bad thing to be known for. I agree 100%, Stephen. I really do think so. Eric mentioned Sean Miller. Hey, Sean Miller's a very good coach. Xavier's not great this year, but he has a good track record overall. No, I think that there are coaches that can win here. Brad Underwood has already shown that he can win here, and he's won big on occasion. We want more March success. We want him to kind of clean up his approach in the offseason so it's a little less up and down. But, I mean, again, this feel like we're waffling a little bit on this podcast because we're contending with all these different thoughts. His down year, they're still making the tournament. I mean, that counts for something. Is Baylor going to make the tournament this year? I mean, we're talking Baylor, a team that won the national title, God, not that long ago. Where is Baylor at here? Baylor, 30th, 16-12. Are they going to make the tournament? Scott Drew and Baylor might not make the tournament. Lost 3 in a row. I don't know, man. Hard to say. Okay, I asked the question for the listener mailbag today. As we head into March, how much did last night's win versus Iowa affect your view of this Illini team? From Jacob, who's also here in the YouTube feed, I think last night was a step in the right direction, and we underestimate that practice is actually important. If we can get at least one, I feel good. If we win both, I'm fully back. Jacob, that's fair. I feel really good if they beat Michigan. I mean, I think that back is a relative term, but back for this team right now would be, oh, okay, all right, let's go win a game, maybe 2 in the tournament. I mean, I think that's what winning against Michigan would do. Winning the next 2 would say, okay, maybe they're getting hot at the right time. Late, to be sure, but better hot in March than in January. And that's why it's a really, really intriguing week coming up. This is from Ethan. Not much has changed. Last night was fun, but it didn't really show us anything. Call it caution, but I'm not sure I'm going to jump on the crazy train like after UCLA again this season, unless we make it to the Saturday, Sunday of the Big Ten tournament. That would be fun. I always like making it to the weekend of the Big Ten tournament. It matters. It does. This is from Paul. While I do think that 2022-23 is the more apt comparison for this year's team, last night's result brought us some striking comps to the 2011-12 team. That was Bruce Weber's final year when they lost 9 of their last 10. The lone win, February 26th of that year at home to Iowa. And interestingly enough, that team entered that Iowa game with a record of 16-12, while this year's squad came in with a record of 17-11. Last night was a relief, but this still seems like a one-and-done come tournament time. Could very well be, Paul. From C. Vance. I agree wholeheartedly with this, C. Vance. He says, glad to see they still have some want-to in them. Now have good showings in the next 2 games and hopefully win 1, and will be trending in a better direction for the tournament. 2 good points there from C. Vance. Yes, they showed some want-to last night. That was big. And the fact that hopefully you win 1, that's just it, C. Vance. They don't need to win both. They don't. You compete in 1, you win the other. Okay, equalize this a bit. It would be completely deflating if you go up to Michigan and you lose by 15. I don't think you should. I think the spread will come out. It will probably be Michigan minus 4.5, 5.5. Let's say 5.5. I would be tempted to take Illinois with that. But I don't know. Fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 5 times. I've done the same thing like Ethan said after UCLA. I thought we're back. I had no doubt in my mind we were beating Michigan State. And then we're up 16. Oh, yeah, we got this. Now, not only are we going to beat Michigan State, we're back. So, I don't think that 1 win against Iowa cleans everything up. But C. Vance said they had some want-to, and I think that is a big tell, C. Vance, and hopefully that translates to the next few games. From Ryan, it basically locked up their at-large bid, which is always a good thing. Had to see it again, but the new lineups and rotations and concerted effort to defend better was nice to see. Michigan and Purdue are kind of in weird spots right now, so anything is possible. Thanks, Ryan. From Teddy, amazing what hitting some shots can do for you. This team is still a liability defensively, and without Morez, they're bad on the glass. My view of the team is still the same. High ceiling, but hard to reach due to youth. Fair? Thanks, Teddy. From Steven, it removed possibility of absolute disaster. However, it doesn't change outlook of first weekend ceiling for this team. Hopefully it makes watching the next 2 games more palatable. From Justin, it did guarantee, I like this, Justin, that we went 3-0 against Mizzou, Indiana, and Iowa. So that will always be a positive to hang our hats on. In terms of going forward, it helped raise the ceiling back up a little bit at least. Justin, great point. If you're going to beat 3 teams in a season, those are the 3. Mizzou, Indiana, Iowa. Hey, the Mizzou win looks pretty good. That's a good team right now. From Illini Gurley, lots of positives. We saw adjustments, better defense, better shot selection, better ball movement, and actually running offense. Concerns are still rebounding and threes not going in. From Mr. Goodwrench, Illini fan. And then the emojis there are, is that a cow and a piece of poop? It's the poo emoji. He says, Iowa is bad, didn't change my view at all. From Mike D, meh, nice W. But it was against an average team. They should have won by 20. Tough crowd. But no, in their defense, yes, Iowa's bad. On the other hand, you did what good teams should do to bad teams. I mean, if they would have won by 5 last night, I would have been, ugh, God, like. And there was a good chunk in that first half where it felt like that's where it was trending. From Robert, none. At most, they win one game against another low seed and then get drubbed by a high seed. They are what they are at this point. I mean, that could be, Robert. This could be fool's gold. I'm trying not to, fall for the banana in the tailpipe here, but it could be. I mean, Robert could be right about that. I don't know. From Andy, Illinois B-ball. Without Merez, our rebounding is not good, and we need to fix the easy cuts to the basket. There were a lot of those last night. Illinois had their share, though, too. I thought the defense for both teams struggled for a while, but, man, Illinois' defense really picked it up. I mean, the second half defense that they had was stifling. I mean, that was encouraging. Iowa is not good, but they can score, and they had a hell of a time doing that last night. From Tyler, it didn't change anything. Got out-rebounded and still shot poorly from 3. I think Iowa is just that bad this year. From Aaron, it didn't. Iowa's terrible. Man, you guys. It's the same script most times out. Attack and build a lead, then start chucking threes. From Tim, when opposing teams don't have the athletes to turn us over or stay in front of our guards and they drive, then we will be fine. This is from OG Illini Weck. I good old OG. Surprised you didn't want to start the episode talking about how bad of a job Brad did. Good day to be a Brad truther. Bad day to be Mike Carpenter. He built this from the basement. OG, I mean this respectfully. You are a moron. You don't either listen to what I say or your reading comprehension is that of a 5-year-old OG. It's called nuance, buddy. It's the same thing that some of you don't quite get. Meaning, Brad Underwood has been very successful here, which indicates, yeah, he's a pretty damn good coach. But there are some concerns that have really reared their head this year. That's it, OG Illini Weck. What I love about these are these nitwits that can't put their name and their face on it. I'm putting my name and face on everything I say. I'm owning what I say. And then I get someone that's like, I'm going to put Chief Illini Weck as my avatar and say, OG, original gangsta Illini Weck. Yeah, tough, says some balding fat ass in their basement sending me a tweet. Get out of here. I mean, I'm in a basement too. I'm just not balding, which is what I assume most of the people making comments about my hair might be. Man, you Twitter people. Not my Twitter people. No, I think this is the thing. The fun part of it is you got to be able to laugh at it because it's just the discourse anymore on it. That's why I've cut back a little bit on how much I interact and how much I get around on Twitter. And God dang, people are just so testy. I'm not testy. I'm really not. And the funny thing is, too, I'm a happy guy. Am I not getting that impression? I have fun. I mean, this is a lot of fun to do. I'm talking sports. And at the absolute worst case, if I'm like at the most pissed off with Illini basketball, which I think this year, honestly, was the Michigan State loss. Like that one was really felt like a reckoning. And then the next week happened after that. At that point, it was just sad. It just bummed me out. But, listen, we ride the ups and downs. I will be emotional sometimes about it. That's fandom. But let's not get it wrong about what I've said about Brad Underwood. I have expressed frustrations with Brad many times. But I've also talked about how good of a coach Brad is many times. The fact is, you could do a hell of a lot worse than Brad Underwood. He's a good coach. His legacy at Illinois is already very strong. I don't know what you want from me, OG Illini Weck, but listen, if you aren't understanding the words coming out of my mouth, you probably are not going to anytime soon. So good luck to you, Pally. Hey, YouTube feed, I appreciate you guys coming in and joining me on this Wednesday evening. And for all those that lined up Twitter. And, Eric, you're so nice about the hair. Thank you. Oh, man. Hey, before we get out of here, got to remind you, we, of course, are sponsored. And the best way to support the podcast is to support our sponsors. Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign, Steak, Seafood, and Spirits. Appreciate them. State Farm agent Brian Hansen, online at brianismyguy.com. For life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend at 217-841-4728. Call and get, can you believe it, your AC check scheduled today. It's coming up. Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing. And Owen Builders, LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Check out a gallery of their work and get a free quote while you are there at owenbuildersllc.com. All right, hey, everybody, let's see if I miss anything in the chat thread. Yeah, appreciate you guys popping in this evening. Have a good rest of your night. And we will be back. I'm not sure if we're going to do a second half pod for Michigan or do a reaction, let's say, Monday. And the only reason I say that is there's only one game next week, and that's Purdue. I mean, Sunday, Friday. So one game next, one weekday game next week. So Illinois gets a nice little spread here without too many games, more time to rest, get even healthier than they have been before. And I'll keep you guys posted on Twitter as to when we would do a Michigan pod. But it's a big one. It's 2:45, kind of a unique start time on Sunday afternoon, and a big opportunity to get this further back on the right track. And it's possible. It is. There were moves KJ had last night. Yeah, and it wasn't his best game. Colin Boswell looked really good. It's like, oh, right, you were a dude that was a 4, borderline 5-star coming out of high school. You're really good sometimes. Tommy, wow. Will Riley, right, you're a 5-star that's going to go to the league after 1 year in college. I mean, there's talent on this team. And sometimes when they're playing hard, they're still a fun watch. There were really large chunks of yesterday's game where that was a fun product to watch on the court. It's still there. If they just put it together a little bit more, they can actually win a few games in March and really kind of equalize how we feel about the season in the moment and in hindsight. When even yesterday going to the Iowa game, I thought, oh, God, are we going to look back on this thing as just an awful year? Well, I don't know. Maybe not. And that's why, hey, you watch the games, you let them unfold. And as frustrated as I got, it's amazing how quickly they can turn back the other direction. I hope that's what this team does. And it would sure make the month of March a heck of a lot more fun if we go into the last however many games there are thinking, well, maybe. You never know. And I don't know. This has truly been one heck of a year. And exhausting in some ways. But I did say after the loss to Duke, which I called that podcast rock bottom, and I think that's not an inappropriate term for as bad as that was, that you have to hit rock bottom in order to have a good comeback story. Now, I was more referring to the idea that Brad Underwood would learn from the things that didn't work this year and would have his greatest success next year or the year after, right? That we would look back at this as the nadir. Well, what if rock bottom and an immediate comeback story, some immediate a redemption arc of sorts happens right here in the next month? Hey, it's sports. That's why sports are fun. You truly never know. And let's just tip the ball against Michigan, see what the heck happens, and then go from there with Purdue next week. And then it's all single elimination tournaments. And I love the Big Ten tournament. I've always been one that looks forward to that. I think it does mean something. And come on, we're going to get our name called in Selection Sunday again. That is worth celebrating. Thank you all for listening or watching, however you get the podcast. If you haven't already, rate or review us, if you could, on YouTube or, well, I guess I should say YouTube. If you can like the video on your way out, everybody, appreciate that. And then rate or review us on Apple Podcast. We will be back either Sunday for the second half of Michigan or maybe Monday as a post-game pod, but I'll keep people posted on Twitter about that. Have a good rest of your week, everybody. It is the 200 level. All right, thanks, YouTube. Appreciate you joining me. Have a good rest of your night.